Picture this. You're cleaning out your grandfather's old barn, pushing through cobwebs and decades of dust, when suddenly you spot something under a moldy tarp. You pull it back and you're staring at a car worth more than most people's houses. This actually happened 7 times. And by the end of this video, you're going to be checking your neighbor's garage like it's a treasure map. So let's dive straight into the holy grail of car collecting, barn finds. And trust me, by the time we get to story number 7, you'll understand why one barn in particular became the automotive equivalent of King Tut's tomb. The lost and found Ferrari collection. Let's start with what might be the most insane barn find story ever documented. Picture this. Hurricane Sandy tears through the East Coast in 2012, and when the dust settles, literally, it reveals something that makes every car collector on Earth weep with envy. A barn collapses, and sitting inside like sleeping giants are 20, count them, 20 vintage Ferraris. This wasn't just a collection, this was an automotive archaeological site. Here's where it gets wild. The owner had been quietly collecting these machines since the 1960s. But here's the thing, nobody knew. Not his neighbors, not the local car clubs, not even half his family. This guy was running a secret Ferrari witness protection program in rural New York. But wait, it gets better. Among the dust-covered beauties were gems like a Ferrari 275 GTB, that's the car that makes grown mechanics cry tears of joy, and a Ferrari 512 BB, which is basically automotive sculpture with an engine that sounds like angels having a really good time. Now you might be thinking, how do you just forget you own 20 Ferraris?
Did you forget something, Bob?
No.
Well, here's the plot twist that'll make you question everything. The owner died, and his family had no idea what was sitting in that barn. They thought Grandpa was just hoarding junk. Junk. $20 million worth of junk. When RM Sotheby's got their hands on this collection, car experts literally had to sit down. Some of these Ferraris hadn't been seen in public since the Carter administration. The auction house called it the Lost and Found Collection, which is probably the most polite way to say, holy crap, where did these come from? But that's not the craziest part. And yes, I know I keep saying that, but trust me, it gets wilder. Ferrari 340 America, the $4 million Picasso. Now, if you thought 20 Ferraris was impressive, wait until you hear about the single car that made its owner richer than some small countries. We're talking about a 1952 Ferrari 340 America. And before you ask, yes, it's as gorgeous as it sounds. Here's the thing about the 340 America. Ferrari only made 24 of them. Ever in the history of the world. You have a better chance of bumping into Bigfoot at your local Starbucks than finding one of these in the wild. But that's exactly what happened to one lucky collector who bought what he thought was just another project car sitting in someone's garage. The seller had no idea what he was parting with. The buyer? Well, let's just say he's probably still laughing all the way to the bank. This particular 340 America had been sitting dormant for decades, covered in dust thicker than a Chicago pizza. The original owner had parked it in the 1970s and basically forgot it existed. 30 years later, his estate sale becomes someone else's lottery ticket. Here's where the story gets absolutely ridiculous. When this car finally made it to auction, it didn't just sell, it exploded. We're talking about a final hammer price that could buy you a nice house in Beverly Hills with enough change left over for a Tesla as a daily driver. $4 million for a car that was literally collecting dust bunnies and probably housing a family of mice. That's more money per pound than caviar, and definitely more entertaining. The automotive press went absolutely bonkers. One journalist described finding this Ferrari as discovering a lost Picasso in your attic, except this Picasso can hit 150 miles per hour and sounds like thunder having an argument with lightning. But here's what really gets me about this story, and this is important. The new owner had to resist every urge to restore it. You know why? Because that dust, that patina, that I've been sleeping in a barn for 40 years look, that's what collectors call barn find patina, and it's worth its weight in gold. Speaking of sleeping beauties, story number 3 involves not one, but 2 automotive legends that spent 25 years in automotive hibernation. The North Carolina double feature. All right, buckle up for this one, because we're heading to North Carolina, where someone's storage building became an accidental automotive museum. Picture this, a Shelby Cobra and a Ferrari 275 GTB sitting side by side like the world's most expensive garage sale, covered in 25 years of dust and regret. Now, for those keeping score at home, we're talking about two of the most desirable sports cars ever made. The Shelby Cobra is basically America's answer to, hey, what happens if we put a massive V8 in a lightweight British roadster? The answer, by the way, is magic, dangerous, tire smoking, paint your hair back magic. And the Ferrari 275 GTB? That's the car that makes Italian sports car designers weep with pride. It's what happens when art and engineering have a passionate romance and create the perfect child. But here's the kicker. These weren't sitting in some climate-controlled collection. They were in a regular storage building, probably next to Christmas decorations and boxes of tax returns from the Reagan era. Well, the kids did deal with it. When they finally cracked open that storage unit, they probably thought they'd hit the automotive lottery. And they weren't wrong. The Shelby Cobra alone was worth enough to buy a really nice house. The Ferrari? Well, let's just say it could pay for college tuition at whatever school you want for multiple kids, with enough left over for graduate degrees. When these two beauties finally made it to auction, the bidding war was legendary. Classic car dealers were literally calling in favors, taking out loans, and probably selling their own mothers to get their hands on these machines. The final sale price? Well, let's just say it was enough to make the storage facility owner question every life decision that led him to rent out space for $50 a month. But wait, there's more. The Ferrari Dino that refused to die. Now, this story is going to test everything you think you know about automotive value, because we're about to talk about a Ferrari Dino 246 GT that looked like it had been through a blender, then left outside during the Ice Age, then possibly used as target practice. The Dino, for those who don't know, was Ferrari's attempt at making a affordable sports car in the 1970s. And by affordable, I mean it only cost as much as a house instead of a small castle. It was also gorgeous. Think Italian supermodel in automotive form. But this particular Dino? This poor thing looked like it had been trying to become one with the earth. Rust had basically claimed every panel. The interior looked like a family of raccoons had been using it as a vacation home, and the engine bay was so far gone that you could probably grow vegetables in it. Most people would have taken one look at this car and called it scrap metal. The smart money would have been on parting it out and using the proceeds to buy a nice bicycle. But here's where this story gets absolutely insane, and I want you to really think about this. This rust bucket, this automotive disaster, this car that looked like it was auditioning for a post-apocalyptic movie, sold for over $200,000. $200,000 for a car that you could literally see through in some places. Why? Because it was still a Ferrari. That prancing horse badge is apparently stronger than rust, time, and basic common sense. The auction house description probably read something like, "needs some work," which is like describing the Titanic as slightly damp. But here's what happened next that really blew everyone's mind. The buyer didn't just restore it, they turned it into a concourse quality masterpiece. Every piece of rust became an opportunity for perfection. Every destroyed component became a chance to upgrade. 2 years later, that same car was winning awards at Pebble Beach. From barn find disaster to automotive royalty. It's like the ultimate glow-up story, except with way more horsepower. The lesson here? Never underestimate the power of a good badge and the determination of someone with deep pockets and questionable decision-making skills. Speaking of questionable decisions, let's talk about story number 5, where someone left what many consider the most beautiful car ever made sitting in a barn like it was an old lawnmower. The Jaguar E-Type that time forgot. All right, we need to have a serious conversation about the Jaguar E-Type, because this isn't just any sports car. This is the machine that made Enzo Ferrari himself admit that it was the most beautiful car ever made. When the guy who created Ferrari says your car is gorgeous, you've basically won automotive beauty contest for all eternity. But apparently, one owner didn't get that memo, because they left their E-Type sitting in a barn for decades, like it was a broken riding mower. The E-Type, for context, was Britain's answer to automotive perfection in the 1960s. It had curves that could make a racetrack weep. performance that embarrassed cars costing twice as much, and a presence that could stop traffic just by existing. This was the car that defined cool before anyone knew what cool meant. But this particular E-Type had been playing the world's longest game of automotive hide-and-seek, parked in the 1980s, forgotten by the 1990s, and rediscovered in the 2010s, looking like it had been taking a very long nap under a blanket of dust and spider webs. Here's what kills me about this story. Barns are not designed for car storage. They're designed for hay, farm equipment, and maybe the occasional barn owl. Cars? They prefer climate control, regular maintenance, and not sharing space with whatever critters think old British sports cars make excellent condominiums. But you know what? This E-Type was built so well that even decades of neglect couldn't kill its soul. When they finally dragged it out into sunlight, underneath all that dust and neglect was still a fundamentally sound sports car waiting for resurrection. The auction was basically a feeding frenzy. Classic car dealers, private collectors, and probably a few people who just wanted to own a piece of automotive art were all throwing money around like it was confetti. The final price? $70,000. Now that might not sound like Ferrari money, but remember, this car was basically a rolling restoration project. In pristine condition, a good E-Type can cost you well into six figures. So whoever bought this barn find basically got a lottery ticket with really good odds. But here's the beautiful part of this story. The new owner didn't just restore it, they brought it back to exactly the way Jaguar intended it to be in 1967. Original paint code, original interior materials, original everything. It was like automotive archaeology, except with better results and probably fewer ancient curses. Now, if you think a Jaguar E-Type is impressive, wait until you hear about story number 6, which involves James Bond's actual ride, the James Bond Aston Martin that went undercover. Hold on to your wallets, folks, because we're about to talk about a barn find so legendary that it probably belongs in the Smithsonian, next to the Hope Diamond and whatever's left of the Constitution. We're talking about an Aston Martin DB5, not just any DB5, but one of the actual cars used in the James Bond films. This isn't just a sports car. This is a piece of cinematic history that happened to have 4 wheels and a really nice exhaust note. The DB5 was already automotive royalty before Bond got his hands on it. Aston Martin had basically created the perfect gentleman's express, fast enough to outrun trouble, beautiful enough to park at the finest restaurants, and sophisticated enough to make you feel like royalty even if you were just driving to the grocery store. But when Bond started driving one in Goldfinger, everything changed. Suddenly, the DB5 wasn't just a car, it was the car. It was what every secret agent, real or imaginary, dreamed of owning. It was 4-wheeled charisma with a license to thrill. And somehow, one of these legendary machines ended up forgotten in a barn like yesterday's newspaper. Here's where this story gets absolutely surreal. This particular DB5 had all the original Bond modifications. We're talking ejector seats, machine guns hidden in the headlights, a bulletproof rear screen, basically everything except the ability to turn invisible. Though honestly, sitting in that barn for decades was pretty close. The owner had apparently decided that owning James Bond's actual car wasn't exciting enough and parked it sometime in the 1980s. Maybe he got tired of explaining to his insurance company why his car needed coverage for potential spy-related incidents. When this automotive time capsule finally made it to auction, the bidding war was legendary.
Ladies and gentlemen, a true icon of automotive history and cinematic legend, we are thrilled to present this magnificent machine.
Movie prop collectors, Bond fanatics, Aston Martin enthusiasts, and probably a few actual secret agents were all throwing money around like they'd just robbed Fort Knox. The final hammer price? Over $500,000. That's enough money to buy a really nice house, a really nice boat, but more importantly, it's proof that some cars are worth more than their weight in gold simply because they made the right movie at the right time. The new owner probably has the coolest conversation starter in automotive history. Ferrari. Oh, this old thing? It's just James Bond's car. But even James Bond's car pales in comparison to story number 7, the Lamborghini Miura that almost became mulch. And now for our final story, we're going to Italy, metaphorically anyway, to talk about what might be the most important barn find in automotive history. Ladies and gentlemen, feast your eyes on the Lamborghini Miura, the car that literally invented the modern supercar and then spent decades playing the world's most expensive game of hide-and-seek. The Miura wasn't just a car when it debuted in 1966, it was a revolution with wheels. Before the Miura, supercars didn't really exist. There were fast cars, sure, but nothing that combined outrageous performance with drop-dead gorgeous Italian styling and the kind of presence that could stop traffic in 3 different time zones. This was the car that made Ferrari nervous, made Porsche pay attention, and made every other automaker realize they were playing checkers while Lamborghini was playing 3-dimensional chess. But somehow, one of these automotive masterpieces ended up forgotten in a barn, probably sharing space with old farm equipment and whatever was left of someone's 1970s disco collection. Here's what makes this story absolutely heartbreaking. The Miura was designed to be driven hard. It was built for winding Italian mountain roads, for showing off at Monaco, for making every journey feel like the scene from the world's coolest movie. Leaving it in a barn was like using the Mona Lisa as a coaster. But time has a way of healing all wounds, especially when there's serious money involved. When this particular Miura finally saw daylight again, it was like watching Sleeping Beauty wake up, except Sleeping Beauty could hit 180 miles an hour and sounded like angels singing opera. The restoration was the stuff of legend. Every bolt, every piece of trim, every inch of that gorgeous Italian leather interior was brought back to factory perfection. It was automotive archaeology meets mechanical artistry, with results that would make grown mechanics weep with joy. When it finally hit the auction block, the feeding frenzy was epic. Classic car collectors, Lamborghini enthusiasts, and people with more money than sense were all throwing cash around like it was Monopoly money. The final price? Let's just say it was enough to fund a small space program. But here's the beautiful ending to this story. The Miura didn't just sell. It went to someone who promised to drive it. Not just garage it, not just show it off at Concours events, but actually use it the way Ferruccio Lamborghini intended it when he created it. Because that's what these machines were born to do. They weren't meant to collect dust or hide in barns. They were meant to roar. If this video made you want to start checking every barn within a 50-mile radius of your house, make sure you hit that subscribe button.